Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you to Charlie too, and thank you to everybody who helped organize this and make this happen. And thank you all for all of the incredible help in 2022. I mean, we had a very close one, and I've shared this story with some of you, but I'll repeat it here just because I think it's kind of surreal what ended up happening. We obviously had a very close election in the midterms, so close, in fact, that the party believed that I was going to win. I was up really big early, and they invited me back to something called new Congress member training, which is a real thing. I didn't even think about it, didn't know it existed until after the election. And I flew back with the lead over Calvert of about 10,000 votes. And as the late returning ballots came in, we were on a tour of the House of Representatives with Speaker Pelosi and about a dozen other people from all over the country who had just been elected to Congress. And it was a pretty incredible experience. My partner, Paolo, had never been inside the US Capitol before. So he was pretty overwhelmed and in awe, as was I, when we were sitting on the floor and the speaker was pointing out the portrait of George Washington on one side and the portrait of Lafayette on the other, and says, hey, this is where FDR asked Congress to declare war on Japan after Pearl Harbor during World War II. And by the way, never forget that Abraham Lincoln was once your colleague in this body. And I kid you not, right around the moment that she says this, I get an alert on my phone from the LA Times that says that Ken Calvert has defeated Will Rollins in California's 41st. So for those of you who have had an awkward job training experience, you can relate very much to, going through something like that. And if you've ever been fired during a job training, it was not dissimilar. Had to return my government issued phone. And so Paolo and I did what a lot of people might do in that situation. We went to a hotel bar nearby, and I was excited to join this group today because its phrase, commit to democracy, reminds me of what happened when I was sitting at that bar after finding out that I had lost, because I started reminiscing on my service at the Justice Department and thinking about going back to work in the National Security Division of our local U.S. Attorney's Office here, because I really loved working on a lot of those cases. But, as we're sitting there and I'm thinking about the cases that I've worked, sort of daydreaming about the life before fundraising, which becomes a relentless part of being a candidate, and it's a pretty brutal part of running for office. Donald Trump comes on screen, and the networks all start covering his new decision to run again in 2024, which he announced very shortly after the midterm elections when we were still in Washington, D.C. for new member training. And I think from that moment on, deep down, I knew that I was going to do this again, because I continue to believe that this is such an incredibly urgent moment for our country and for all of us to commit to our democracy. And, the cases that have developed over the past few months, as we've seen from Mar-a-Lago to the federal indictment related to overturning the election to the recent indictment yesterday in Georgia, there really has never been a moment like this in American history. And there has never been a more urgent moment for Americans across all generations, across all party lines, to unite and step up to defend the republic that so many people have given their lives to create, for those of us who are fortunate enough to call America home today. And I just fundamentally believe that we all have an obligation as Americans to do our part. And my part, I think, is helping recapture a pro-democracy majority in Congress, and doing that by taking some lessons that we learned in the midterms and focusing on where we have room to improve in the presidential year. So I'll talk a little bit about how well the campaign's been going so far too, and then just share some of what we learned looking back on the results from 2022. So here are some good silver linings from our election. We were the only red to blue candidate in California, the only Democratic challenger in the entire state to win independent voters. So that is a huge accomplishment, and it's a very good sign for what happens in 24, because typically in a presidential year, Democratic turnout in California across House districts increases pretty dramatically. In our race, we know that we had a 10-point turnout gap between Republicans and Democrats. So about 61% of registered Republicans voted and 50% of registered Democrats voted. And even with that 10-point gap, I only lost to Calvert by about 4.5 points. So 48-52 margin roughly at the end of the day. And if you can get that close with a 10-point gap in registered voter turnout, that is a very good sign for what happens in that presidential year with higher Democratic turnout. So I always sort of joke that I wish I could take more credit for the future victory that we are going to have in this race in 2024. But the reality is that demographic trends in this district and the fact that there is a presidential election is going to have a lot more to do with our success than what we've built here. But I take a lot of pride being a part of the team that has actually built something unique in California 41, which I'll talk about in just a second as well. But the other metric from the midterms that I like to share with folks is we had the best performance of any Democratic challenger compared to President Biden in 2020. So what do I mean by that? Well, this was not the most Democratic district, as all of you know. This was actually a district that Donald Trump won by about 1 point in 2020. We think President Biden will win this district in 24. If you look at the numbers now that registration has changed, where Democrats have a voter registration advantage, it probably already is a Biden district. But what I mean by that when I say the best performance compared to Biden is that we lost less than 1% of his vote share total in this congressional district in the midterms. And why that's important is if you compare it to some of the other California races where we were losing Biden plus 14 congressional districts, we were able to maintain a level of support that was very unique. And it's a big part of the reason why I think the party's already put California 41 on its offensive target list for this next election. So, you know, that's not something that we would have been able to do without the help of people that are on this Zoom right now. And I just can't tell you how proud I am to be a part of that team. And, you know, the team included some Republicans in California 41. You know, we got endorsed by the former Republican Assembly leader in California, the former Republican elected sheriff in Riverside County, some former high-ranking national security, military, and intelligence officials who are Republicans who served under President Reagan, President George W. Bush. These are folks who believe in democracy and the rule of law, and I believe that that is a big part of the reason we were able to build a big tent coalition in the midterms and have some great overperformance. Now, having said that, we obviously lost. So where did we go wrong? Well, we did well in the Coachella Valley, so that's a good sign. Beat him by about 15 points, and the reason that's a good sign is because it happens to be the market in this congressional district, the media market, that is affordable. So we raised a lot of money in the last election, but because some of the district is in the Coachella Valley and the other portions of it, Corona, Lake Elsinore, Menifee, some of the larger cities on the western side of Riverside County are in the LA media market, we could afford very little broadcast television ads. And a lot of folks in that part of the district have been represented by Ken Calvert for over 30 years. And I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me after the election and said, I didn't even know we had a chance. I didn't even know you were running. I didn't even know we were living in a brand new congressional district. So there were a lot of Democrats who unfortunately just didn't know how great of an opportunity we had to defeat Calvert last year. But the good news is we got some of the best national media coverage that we could have asked for after the election, because it took them a week to find out that Calvert won. And in that period of time, voters across our district became more and more aware of the fact that they had a real opportunity to beat Ken Calvert. And the media this next election cycle already has been covering our race in a way that is much more, I think, fair and accurate compared to the way it was written off by many pundits in 2022, because we proved them wrong. So what we are going to do in this next election is focus heavily on those western Riverside County cities like Corona, Lake Elsinore, Menifee, because we know Democratic turnout was lower by double digits in those cities compared to the Coachella Valley. People didn't know me as well. I had much less name ID. And unfortunately, I just had 5 months after a June primary to introduce myself to about 1 million people. I mean, 750,000 to 1 million people roughly. So it was difficult to do that in 5 months. We're starting way early this cycle. I'll just share a quick update about where we are after having launched in mid-May before I open it up to Q&A, because I want to have some dialogue with everybody. But we, in the second quarter, set an all-time record for California. No congressional candidate in the entire history of the state has ever raised as much as we just did in our first quarter after launching in an off year. So obviously this is not yet the election year. This is 2023. Nobody in the state's history has ever raised what we just did. So thank you to the folks who are on the call today for helping contribute to that incredible accomplishment. We were the #2 fundraiser among all congressional challengers in the United States, Democrat or Republican, just behind Adam Frisch, who of course is running against Lauren Boebert, who was another future member of Congress who I met at new member training, and we both found out that we lost while we were in Washington, D.C. So we've been able to commiserate over that, and his race is going really well as well in Colorado. So that's great to see. But we've just had an incredible start. 30 members of the California delegation, all 3 of the U.S. Senate candidates in California, Speaker Pelosi, former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, of course, who's been an amazing advocate and ally to this campaign since the very beginning. So we are off to the races, and we've got not a real serious primary in this congressional district, which also presents a very unique opportunity for the party and for the campaign to use the resources that we raise now against Calvert in the general election and to really build up that name ID. But I just want to say thank you again to all of you for the incredible support both last year and in the beginning phases of this campaign. I mean, it's only been, I think, just about 3 months since we launched today, basically, and we've done incredibly well. And I think the wind really is at our backs as we head into 2024. So with that message of gratitude, I'm happy to open it up to Q&A and looking forward to talking with everybody tonight.
Will, hi, my name is Charlie Guidry, and welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And that's just such a heartbreaking story about what happened to you and your colleague. Oh gosh, we're glad you're back. Dorothy was asking, I know you mentioned that you had endorsements for the previous campaign. What endorsements do you have as of this moment?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of great ones already in this next election. So I started on day one with endorsements from 30 members of Congress from California, including Speaker Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, the Attorney General of California. I expect we'll get support from the governor again in this race, and Senator Padilla down the road as well. But so far, we've just had a great amount of support from the California delegation, and of course, Equality PAC, Victory Fund. A lot of the LGBT members of the House have been hugely supportive. Chairman Aguilar, number two Democrat in House leadership, Whip Catherine Clark. So we've got, and of course, had a lot of support from the DCCC chair, Susan Delbene, who spent a lot of time with me in the beginning of the year, encouraging me to run again. And I think that really, I always say it took me, the first time I ran, I didn't meet or sit down with the chair of the DCCC until I think I'd been in the race for 6 months. And to give you an idea of how different I think the party is looking at this race this time, Chair Delbene flew to Southern California, spent an hour and a half with me one-on-one before I had even decided to do this again. And having support from people like her and people like Pete Aguilar, who ran once, came close and said, "Hey, you got to do it again. You'll win it with a higher turnout in the presidential year." That's really meant a lot. So we're very fortunate to have some great endorsements so far. And if you're interested in seeing all of them, we've had some great local and state elected officials too who've supported the campaign already. And you can go to willrollinsforcongress.com, and then there's an endorsements page that has everybody listed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there some of the Republicans that were supporting you, or do you think that they're supporting you this time also?
I hope that we will be able to get that same support, and we're working to do that, and we're actually working to expand that. So I want to go beyond just there's some great folks who helped me last time who I'm actually going to be meeting with personally pretty soon in the next couple months. But I want to try and go beyond just the folks who supported us last time, because I do think that really sends a strong signal to independents and moderate Republicans, of whom I believe there really are a lot, especially in this congressional district. And if you look at some of the latest polling, there's about 25% of Republicans who have said that they are opposed to Donald Trump as their nominee. And if we can get something like 25% of Republicans, registered Republicans, voting for this campaign in the next election, I mean, we're going to win by a significant margin. And I think that is possible. So, I'm working not just to try and court some of the elected Republican support from folks who have stood up for our democracy, but also going to local Chamber of Commerce events where there are a lot of registered Republicans who attend, and trying to introduce myself, because I think when we've done that before, and I've talked a lot about my bipartisan work with Governor Schwarzenegger and then attorneys general in both parties, that really has resonated with a lot of those ordinary voters. And I'm confident that we can get a pretty decent number, maybe not a majority, but a decent size number of Republican voters to break for us in this next election.
Thank you so much. Both Dorothy and Ken are asking, what financial support will you get from the state and national Democratic parties?
Well, the good news is they've already spent more in this election than they did in the entire last election. And it's August, 15 months away from the general. The DCCC has, as I understand it, already bought some digital ads talking about Ken Calvert's record on choice. Women, I hope, will be a majority of our electorate in 2024. They are statistically. And so if the turnout is there, they'll be a majority. So highlighting Calvert's record on that issue and a whole host of other extreme positions that he's taken over the years is something I believe that the DCCC will do in a way that's much more meaningful this time, because they've already started to do that in our district. And we've had some great cooperation from them already in just building the campaign operation. And one other thing that I hope that the National Party will do much earlier, which they have done in the past in similar congressional districts, is invest in field offices across the county. And that is an ask that we've made of them. It's one that I'm confident we will get. And especially given that they've already started spending money. The other cool thing that I think is a great sign for us is Pete Aguilar has opened up a joint fundraising victory fund account with our campaign and a couple of other crucial House races in California. That's a big difference from what happened in the last cycle. Again, and Speaker Pelosi also has announced that she's raising, I think, I'm going to forget the exact number, but it's a significant amount, millions of dollars towards the 5 to 7 California House districts, including ours, that are going to be key to the majority. So we've already gotten some very, very powerful help early in this campaign, and a great sign for 24.
Thank you so much. Myra is asking, how do you plan to deal with the revolting rhetoric of lying and cheating and demeaning that we hear from the MAGA group?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that our rhetoric in politics, unfortunately, has just, we all have seen it happen, right, since 2016. And just when you think it can't get worse, unfortunately, the rhetoric seems to get worse. And I think the criminal cases, don't get me wrong, accountability is crucial. But unfortunately, because we have a lack of political leadership from some of the folks in the House, like Ken Calvert and McCarthy and others, who are just refusing to stand up for the rule of law and are attacking law enforcement, I think we're going to see that rhetoric deteriorate further, at least on the far right. So I think it's incumbent upon people like me to really go into those environments that I described earlier, which aren't always friendly to Democratic candidates. But there is no way to combat that rhetoric and to defy and challenge the stereotype that a lot of folks have about Democrats unless you go in and show up and tell them who you are. And I've shared a story before about going to a Chamber of Commerce event in Norco, which it was about how to get the city of Eastvale its own zip code, because a lot of folks were just trying to get their Amazon packages delivered to the right address and picked up from the right place. And it was a challenge for the local residents. And this is not a partisan issue. It's just trying to get packages picked up from your doorstep or delivered to the right place. And there was a far right member of the California State Assembly, a representative from his office got up and said, "We'd like everybody here to support the assemblyman's new bill to require teachers to out LGBT kids to their parents and make that a function of the government, to make sure the government enforces that. And, I guess maybe we create investigators to go surveil teachers and watch them in the classroom and make sure that they're outing the gay kids." I guess that was the idea behind this bill. And I swear everybody in the room, didn't matter if you were a liberal or a conservative, just kind of looks at each other like, what is this person talking about? And why are they so focused on culture war issues that do nothing to help people in Eastvale get their own zip code? I mean, that's what the whole meeting was about. And I think that kind of tone deafness and also just someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and do hard work and get things done for people who just want their packages picked up. When you go and talk to Republican voters about issues like that, or, they were talking about folks who've had their packages stolen. And I was able to talk about some of my first cases as a rookie federal prosecutor, where you're going after people stealing the mail. That stuff resonates across party lines. It's just a common nonpartisan problem that everybody wants solved. And I can't tell you how powerful those meetings have been for me. And especially to have people come up to me afterwards, which one guy did, who was a local elected representative on one of the city councils in the western side of the district. And he said, I voted for Ken Calvert in this last election. And he kept telling all of us that you were a crazy left-wing wacko. But now that I've met you in person, you seem really normal. And I said, thank you. I feel pretty normal. So I'm glad we were able to bond over that. And I share that story because I just think that that's part of the way we end this division and rhetoric that has creeped into our politics, is by having those echo chambers broken down. And the only way we do that is to have candidates willing to go into those environments that are not traditional Democratic clubs or Democratic groups or organizations. We have to be talking to folks on the other side. And it's going to be a main theme of this next campaign for me.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Linda is asking, what are the main concerns of young people in your district? And could you give us an idea of your top 3 issues that are important to your constituents?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start, I think, with Gen Z, because Gen Z and millennials can make up a majority of the electorate if they choose to turn out. And I was just attending a meeting about this very topic earlier today. And, I think that something that I've talked about with folks when I go to high schools across the district that I've really enjoyed is telling them how much power that they actually have, and reminding folks that if you don't want the government making decisions about your body, about contraception, about your decision of when you might start a family, then you need to vote, because you have the power to shape the future of the United States. And that is consistently among young voters in this district in Riverside County, a major concern to them. And if you've seen what happened in Texas with the federal judge issuing a nationwide ban on mifepristone that fortunately was overturned or stayed on appeal, I mean, that would affect every single young person and young women, of course, in California. So those kinds of decisions, when they make the news, and I think the difference too in 2024 and versus 2022 is people know that in 2024, the federal government is on the line. In 2022, I don't think people fully appreciated that in places like California and New York. They thought that they were safe from government interference in their bedrooms and in their doctor's offices. But in 2024, with the White House, the Senate, and Congress all at stake, people know now that they absolutely have to vote. And so I think reproductive freedom has been a huge issue for young people. I think LGBT rights, I've seen again and again, young people, Gen Z, millennials too, to an increasingly greater extent. We care about equality and freedom for women and the LGBTQ community. And so that's great. I think we need to encourage that kind of turnout among our young people. And the other issue that consistently comes up with Gen Z voters, gun violence, and rightfully so. I mean, I'm running against a guy who has gotten more money from the NRA than any other member of Congress from California. He will not even vote to support federal red flag laws, which are just designed to take guns away from people who have threatened to shoot up a school. Think about how extreme that position is. And, there's just a lot of young people who have grown up in this era of constant mass shooting drills, hiding under their desks, that don't want their own kids to live through it. And they certainly don't want to relive that experience as adults. And so I think those are some of the most important issues that I've seen for young folks in the district. And they are among some of my top priorities when I get elected in 24. I think the other one for Riverside County really relates to infrastructure, something we talked a lot about in the last campaign. If you live in Corona, Lake Elsinore, Menifee, and you're commuting west, you've got a really brutal commute each day, every day. And so I think we need more members of Congress who are focused on making sure that people who have to go commute around Southern California are spending less time in the car, more time with their families at home. Climate, another huge issue in the Coachella Valley. We've seen record-breaking heat. My air conditioning, as you may be able to tell, is currently not working in my own apartment. So those kinds of issues really are absolutely life or death, and they will become life or death for this district in particular, because the Coachella Valley is going to be uninhabitable if we don't have political leadership that recognizes the existential threat that is climate change. So those are just some of my priorities for the district, and look forward to talking about them and highlighting the contrast between me and Calvert throughout the next 15 months.
Yeah, really appreciate hearing all your input. Kathy would like to know, how are you going to reach the Hispanic community?
Great question. We need to do more. We know from 22 that we did win a majority of Latino voters in this district, which is great, but we need to expand that majority. 30% of the electorate is Latino, and Latino turnout continues to be well below other turnout among different demographic groups in this congressional district. So I'm trying to rely a lot on the advice and guidance of people like Congressman Ruiz, people like Karina Quintanilla, who's the first Latina ever to serve on the Palm Desert City Council. We've had some great Gen Z support from people like Alan Vargas, who lives in Corona. And listen, I gotta show up and listen and try and make sure that we are not just listening, but hearing, right? I think a lot of times people will show up and just sit there and nod. And you have to hear the concerns of the Latino community in this congressional district in order to advocate for them. And you also have to recognize that trust is not earned overnight. You have to earn that day after day by showing up again and again and again, and making the effort to meet people where they are and to understand what are the issues that have a disproportionate effect on the Latino community in California 41. Why is the rate for high school graduation lower for Latino kids in this congressional district than it is for white kids? Why is it that the employment rate for young Latinos between the ages of 18 and 30 is lower in Riverside County than it is for white kids of the same age? Why is it that we're not creating more economic opportunity for kids in the Latino community, the same ones that kids in the white community are getting access to at higher rates from all the data that we're looking at? And so trying to study those issues, being aware of them, and showing up and paying attention, and having an open heart and an open mind, so you can actually roll up your sleeves and use the work that and the skills that I developed as a federal prosecutor to understand how federal law can affect and improve the lives of everybody in this district, is another thing that I'm really looking forward to doing in the next 15 months.
Thank you so much. Larry's asking, how will you plan to win over Republican voters while still being committed to the positive Democratic options?
Great question. I mean, I think there are a couple of things that I've noticed have really resonated with those voters. One is I talk about the fact that Calvert is the only candidate in this race who's raised their taxes. And that kind of catches people off guard because they think, oh, it's a Republican congressman, he's always lowered my taxes. Not true. 2017, Ken Calvert lowered the mortgage interest deduction and capped the state and local income tax deduction in California in 2017. That caused a lot of tax bills on Californians to go up. And so if we had a truly independent congressman who cared about delivering for his constituents instead of what Donald Trump was telling him to do in 2017, which was punish the blue states, we would all have lower tax bills in this county. So look, affordable housing, if you have a mortgage now that's above 750 in Riverside County, which is becoming increasingly common because of the skyrocketing home prices, you are paying more in taxes thanks to Ken Calvert. And you are deducting less of your state taxes thanks to Ken Calvert. So I try to highlight that because it catches some people by surprise and they don't totally know his record. I think the other thing that's been resonating with a lot of Republican voters is this idea of personal freedom and liberty, because there are libertarians in the Republican Party. There are small government conservatives in the Republican Party. There are a lot of average Republican voters who have young daughters, who have LGBT folks and their families, and they do not want the federal government invading their personal lives. They do not want the federal government telling them that they need to pick up their phone to call their local congressman before they make a choice about their own reproductive health care, or before they get help for their kid in the context of a psychotherapy appointment, a medical decision that should be left to families and their kids. These are very small government, personal freedom, liberty issues that actually really resonate with small government conservatives. I think the other thing that I've seen really appeal to a lot of Republicans is an anti-corruption platform that should apply not just to Republicans, not just to Democrats, to all Americans who are serving in the House of Representatives. So let's ban all members of Congress from trading stock. Let's impose some term limits on members of Congress so that we're not stuck with the same folks representing us for more than a half century. Let's get some new blood into our leadership. Let's ban all members of Congress from lobbying after their service is complete. Let's pass some anti-corporate PAC reforms so that we're not just getting the airwaves flooded by corporate and dark money every time we turn on the TV. Let's even maybe shorten the election period so we're not inundated with political ads for every, our constant 2-year cycles, right? There's a lot of common sense reforms that I think have broad appeal to folks in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that I plan to highlight as much as possible in this next campaign. And I've seen it really resonate with those Republican audiences.
Thank you for sharing some wonderful ideas. A representative, again, one of our guests is from Indivisible 49, and she's asking, is your field team up and running? And were you part of Jamie Raskin's Democracy Summer Program?
So we do have a little bit of a start with our field program. We've had some amazing volunteers this cycle who have already created a precinct captain plan. And you can actually sign up for that. And if Kobe's on the Zoom, Kobe can maybe put in the contact info for how folks can sign up to volunteer to either be a precinct captain, or if you want to help us make phone calls to get folks registered. We've already got some organizations that are helping us do that. But what we're trying to do is look at the data from 2022, look at the projection for 2024, and we're getting folks assigned precinct by precinct across the congressional district so that when push comes to shove next November, everybody's got a certain number of voters for whom they are responsible. And it's broken down literally at the precinct level, which is not something that we were able to do in this last election. And so that program is already underway. They've already had a lot of success getting people signed up for it. And we're going to continue to build on that and hopefully partner. We have had some conversations with Field Team 6. We want to continue to partner with organizations like them, Grassroots Democrats HQ. That's been helpful. A lot of the LA Democratic clubs are very close to Corona and Lake Elsinore. They're going to help us out on the western side of the county. Of course, the Dem clubs all across Southwest Riverside County have been really enthusiastic, and we're trying to partner with them too. And then to your question about Jamie Raskin's program, I did not attend that, but I would love to learn more about it. So if you can drop it in the chat, we will be sure to reach out to him. He was a huge help to me last cycle and would love to learn more.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then we'll turn it over to Linda to summarize. But sorry, let's see. Nancy wanted to know what your thoughts are about Supreme Court reform. Did you get muted for some reason? Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. My fault. I muted myself.
Okay. So Nancy wanted to know, do you have any thoughts about Supreme Court reform? And you should also know that as we've been speaking, people are donating and giving you some really good kudos. So you should review the chat before you leave.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you guys. Really, really appreciate it. So great question. I do think we need reform, right? And I always like to take this step back and look at what's happened at the popular vote level in the United States from 1988 to now. And what's happened during that period is the Republicans have won at the national level twice the popular vote in, getting up to nearly 40 years, right? And we're kind of approaching that. So over 30 and approaching 40 before they have won, another popular vote. So they've done that twice, but they've got a 6-3 majority on the US Supreme Court. And they have made it a priority. And unfortunately, because of that difference in the popular vote turnout and the outcome and the consistency of the court, we have what others have called an anti-majoritarian court that is making it its mission to go out and impose its view of personal liberty and its view of the Constitution, ignoring decades of precedent created by justices over the course of our country's history to impose a very radical far-right view of the law, despite only having that two election victory at the popular level, which of course is a function of the Electoral College, which I can also spend a lot of time talking about the problems with that. But I think to the question about court reform, our concern, I think collectively as a society, should be how do we depoliticize the court? Because it is tempting to expand it and to appoint new justices to compensate for the kind of anti-majoritarian attack on all of us that has been organized by people like Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. But I fear that could lead to a tit-for-tat retaliation, party to party, chamber control to president control year after year, with some very concerning consequences for the court's legitimacy long-term. So I think that when people talk about Supreme Court reform, the question has to be, how do we meaningfully restore independence to the judiciary? Because that is what most Americans want, a truly independent, apolitical judiciary that follows precedent and respects the rule of law. That's how we have our third branch, our check and balance on the executive and the legislative branches. And so I've suggested, as others have too, let's think about rotating circuit judges on and off the Supreme Court. Let's consider expanding the size, but not just in a way that results in appointments for whoever happens to control the White House, but more circuit judges selected at random who have been appointed by presidents in both parties to the court, depending on how their term is going. So, you got a judge sitting on the Second Circuit or the Ninth Circuit. Maybe they get rotated onto the Supreme Court for 5 years, and then they get rotated off at random. Maybe you randomize petitions for certiorari, which are the way that the court, of course, hears cases. The court right now gets to pick and choose which cases it hears. I think there is no better example of this than the 303 creative case, which was literally invented by far-right religious zealots that wanted the Supreme Court to create a First Amendment right to discriminate against LGBT people. The court reached down, picked that case, and as we learned after it was decided, it may not have even been a real plaintiff that was involved in that. I mean, the plaintiff that was cited in the briefs says that he never asked for a cake to be made, right? So we have to do something to address those kinds of manufactured controversies that the conservative organizations like the Federalist Society and others have been so effective at developing in recent years. And I think part of the way we do that is by randomizing those cert petitions and rotating those judges on and off the court. And then, of course, I think having a term limit for Supreme Court justices makes a lot of sense. I think the life tenure, as we've seen with some of the corruption recently from Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, even Justice Roberts, unfortunately, with his wife's role as a legal recruiter for some of the lawyers who appear before the Supreme Court, there's a lot of appearance of impropriety, to say the least. And I believe Congress should pass and enforce anti-corruption ethical reforms that apply to the Supreme Court. And I think those three things would be a really good place to start.
Thank you so much for all your thoughtful answers. I'll turn you over to Linda.
Well, thank you. In 2020, you impressed us. And now in 2022, you inspire us again. All of us, I know, share this. I can see from the chat box that's fired up, and we'll send you a copy of comments too, is that you are just such an example, of a stellar candidate rising in the Democratic Party. And so we're just honored that you came to visit us tonight. Your ideas are inspiring and your energy is impressive. But we have one more request from you tonight. Besides thanking you and taking it very seriously, how important you find grassroots organizations. We wanted to know if you could just make a closing comment to us. You've shared so much information with us. We have a lot to think about, a lot of notes to be taken off this recording of good information and ideas. But if you had, what would be your closing statement and closing thoughts to us tonight?
Well, thank you, Linda, for the kind words. I really, really appreciate that. And hopefully next time we chat, my AC will be working in my apartment. So that's one thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is I've been thinking a lot about John Lewis and the Freedom Riders in the 1960s lately. And it is easy in this modern era to get cynical, and it is easy to feel hopeless given what's happened to the country in the last few years. And I've felt that way myself. But then when you think and read about people like John Lewis in the 1960s and getting on those buses and sitting in those diners and having mobs of thousands attacking them, being beaten, and not responding, not reacting, and being nonviolent. I mean, there is no greater form of heroism than that in a lot of ways, right? And I think that there's no greater form of optimism about what it means to persist and to make this country a better place for future generations. The idea of people like John Lewis and the Freedom Riders in the 60s doing that for all Americans and making this country a truly equal place and trying to continue that legacy, because people like Lewis and so many other civil rights leaders have known that what makes America exceptional is not that we are perfect, it's that our union must become more perfect. And I wake up every day thinking about those stories and the people who have fought to overcome so much. And we've had some dark moments in our history, and I know it's a scary time for a lot of us, but I believe that we will win this next election because we will all honor our legacy as Americans to stand up and do the right thing, like so many who have come before us. And I just, thank you again for having me today. And thank you for being a part of our team and helping to protect our democracy in the future of the United States.
Thank you, Will. You give us hope. Someone just put that in the chat box. You give us hope. Thank you so much for attending today. And you don't look at all like you don't have air conditioning.